U.S. President Donald Trump gave an update on Operation Epic Fury. He spoke about his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
10 days is up actually today, so I gave him 11, I guess, indirectly. I thought it was inappropriate the day after Easter. I want to be a nice person. They have till tomorrow.
That deadline is set for 8 p.m. Eastern Time, a day from now. Trump says that the U.S. will strike power plants and target civil infrastructure. Tehran has rejected the latest ceasefire proposal, according to Iranian state media, saying that they want a permanent end to the war. The message was conveyed through Pakistan, a key mediator. CBC's Katie Nicholson is in Washington with more. Katie, Trump continued to talk about the consequences Iran could face if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Let's talk about how the U.S. president is doubling down.
Yeah, it really is a kind of a doubling down for the last 24 hours. It's the same thing we've been hearing, this sort of repetition of that Easter morning threat to start knocking out civilian infrastructure if Iran doesn't open, as he put it, the effing strait. Those comments, of course, were met with harsh criticism from Democrats, even some on the right, and, of course, international law experts who have pointed out that strikes on civilian infrastructure, that's generally considered a war crime, though, of course, there are some exceptions. So Trump today was asked again today, if there were civilian targets that would be off limits, and this was his response.
We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to. We don't want that to happen.
Now, remember, Donald Trump has given a few sliding deadlines here, Sarah, on the reopening of the strait going back weeks into March. So this could be bluster. Or it could lead to escalation. Those intermediaries are still trying to strike a deal to end this war. Earlier today, we heard that the Iranians had rejected a 45-day ceasefire plan. Apparently, the Iranians are pushing for something more permanent. Their state media actually reports that there was a 10-point plan that was sent to Pakistan by the Iranians today. Of course, Pakistan helping with these mediations. But it isn't clear that these negotiations are going anywhere. The rhetoric certainly continues to be very heated, not just from the President of the United States, but the spokesperson for Iran's Revolutionary Guard, who this afternoon called the U.S. president delusional and his threats rude, arrogant, and baseless.
Katie, at that very long press conference, Donald Trump also spoke about the rescue mission for that airman who was missing after his jet was shot down. I think we learned a lot.
Yeah, so new details really directly from the president on that daring rescue. The weapons officer, of course, had been missing. The pilot was recovered within hours after they had both ejected from the F-15. But turns out they were flung quite a distance from one another with that power of that ejection. So the weapons officer who was injured, he basically managed to rely on his training, according to the U.S. president, to survive. Here's a little bit of how the president put it.
The officer followed his training and climbed into the treacherous mountain terrain and started climbing toward a higher altitude, something they were trained to do in order to evade capture. They want to always go as far away from the site of the shoot down. You want to go as far away because they all head right to that site. You want to be as far away as you can. And he was injured, and he was an amazing, amazing thing. He scaled cliff faces, bleeding rather profusely, treated his own wounds, and contacted American forces to transmit his location.
And of course, the CIA, they managed to locate him in the crevice of one of those mountains. Now, we also got new details about those planes that had to be left behind enemy lines. You might have seen those blown up C-130s. So apparently what happened is they landed on a sort of a farm. It had sandy, soft soil. When they tried to go wheels up, basically it had sunk down and couldn't take off, so they had to be destroyed. And what happened is they sent in smaller planes to fly everyone back to safety. And Sarah, the Daily Mail is reporting that those smaller aircraft were de Havilland Dash 8s, which of course a Canadian-made plane. The U.S. military does have some that they've sort of adapted for their own uses. So an interesting Canadian connection to this rescue.
Thanks, Katie. And CBC's Katie Nicholson in Washington. Okay, so to talk more about the latest that's happening in Iran, we have retired Admiral Andy Loisel, who served more than 35 years in the Navy, and in his last mission, he was the director of air warfare. Andy, it's good to have you on the program. Thank you.
Great to be here, Sarah.
What are your thoughts on the threats that Trump has made on Iran, if in fact they don't reach a deal by tomorrow's deadline? And I'll just say, I know that it has been a sort of a bit of a moving target here. He's backtracked before, but what he's talking about right now seems very specific in terms of timing.
I agree with that statement, but you've got to kind of understand we've been going for over a month now, hitting military-only targets in a attempt to leave the civilians out of it, and this has failed to sway the regime. They're coming out with their 10-point plan, as you mentioned earlier, and they're going to say, hey, you have to promise that this is a permanent ceasefire and you will never attack us again. And that's pretty difficult to promise when the regime has really failed to honor any of the previous agreements they made during JCPOA or anything else that they've agreed to. They've always kind of worked behind the scenes and worked counter to what they had previously agreed to. So if you're going to behave like that, you can't have an expectation that somebody who is in a position of winning a war right now is going to agree that we're never going to attack you again.
So if, in fact, there is not a deal in time, what do you think, based on what we have heard and read, frankly, from the U.S. president in terms of social media posts, what do you expect might play out?
Well, he's made it pretty clear what he expects to play out. And, by hitting military-only targets, the regime hasn't changed their mind. So what you're basically saying as the regime at that point is, you haven't done enough damage yet for me to change my mind and how I'm going to behave. And so Trump has turned up the heat and said, here's what I'm going to do next. Is this enough? Is this threat enough to make you change your mind? And thus far, at least through the intermediaries in Pakistan, it appears that answer is no. And so, people will call some of these targets civilian targets, but they're in effect dual-use targets. Obviously, they benefit civilians, but they also provide the power to run any of the military systems that they have remaining left of them. And then any of those bridges are also military supply routes as well. So I would refer to them as dual-use targets.
So that leads me sort of my next question. You have partially answered it, but there are those who have heard these threats and have suggested that these are civilian targets. So you take a little issue with that, and that then that would make any attack on them constitute a war crime. What's your thought there?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of politics involved with statements like that, and there are a lot of people that are going to oppose anything that this president says. And so that's kind of the tack that they're taking. But there's no military commander who is going to look at intact supply routes that are helping the enemy move weapons, men, and materiel to their next place where they require them for their next battle, and not look at that as a strategic target. And so it's a legitimate target if they choose to do it. And I think they've shown great restraint in avoiding those thus far and allowing Iran to potentially come to the conclusion that they're losing this and they need to negotiate a settlement. But they haven't chosen that path so far. So you have to at least make the threat and see if you can get them to come to the table. It's the military pressure that allows the diplomacy to work.
Andy, I think I have probably time for just one more. And what I really want to ask you about is not so much the details of the rescue of the missing airmen, although what has played out and what we have heard from as high up as the U.S. president has seemed, pretty dramatic and in a lot of detail that I was a bit surprised by, to have that much detail put out there in terms of what went into rescuing that soldier. Are you surprised that they have been as forthcoming with how that mission took place?
I'm frankly surprised at several things from that rescue. I was surprised at the pure daylight reconnaissance that was going on. There were lots of pictures in Iranian media of C-130s refueling helicopters in broad daylight at relatively low altitude. So that to me said that they were willing to accept a lot of risk in order to go and retrieve this airman. And then, I would prefer that we left most of our techniques and procedures and tactics out of the public sphere. We're still in a conflict right now, and there is always the potential that someone else could get shot down. So any information that we provide to our adversary has the potential to be used against us, and I would prefer if we left all of those things as quiet as humanly possible.
Retired Admiral Andy Loisel, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.